Bula Vinaka, Vinaka Vaka Levu. Can I say what a pleasure it is to be back here in the Pacific, particularly as part of the new Australian government. Can I acknowledge your wise and gracious Secretary-General, Henry Puna, and the staff of the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. Can I acknowledge representatives from the Council of Regional Organisations, senior government officials from the Government of Fiji, members of the Diplomatic Corps, members of our Pacific Vuvale, joining us from around the region, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Well, this is my fourth day as Foreign Minister. And it's my first bilateral visit, as Secretary-General said, and I hope I will be here often, and I hope that we can work well together as we deal with the challenges and opportunities this world presents us with. And in particular, I'm deeply honoured to be here at the Pacific Island Forum, the preeminent Pacific institution, the heart of Pacific regionalism. For more than 50 years, the Forum has brought us together in the Pacific way. Through the Forum, Pacific nations have championed their interests on the international stage and led international thinking on issues such as climate. My country is a founding member of the Forum. It's a membership we treasure. And I've come here on day 4 because I wanted to say in person and in the Pacific, on behalf of the new Australian government, how deeply we value being part of the Pacific family. And to our Pacific brothers and sisters, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your stewardship of our shared blue Pacific with all of its amazing biodiversity. Thank you for being custodians of some of the planet's most ancient cultures and so many of the world's languages. We feel a profound sense of kinship with the Pacific, of wanting to connect with the Pacific as part of one family. We have long-standing bonds forged in times of crisis, but sustained in peace and in prosperity. And these bonds are evident in the dynamic contributions made by the Pacific diaspora to Australian life in music, in culture, sport, academia, the many thousands of seasonal workers who contribute to our rural communities, support critical industries while gaining valuable skills. And one of the most powerful and moving examples of the depth of our bond was the way in which our Pacific brothers and sisters came to Australia's aid during the Black Summer bushfires and more recently the devastating floods. It reminds us that we do what families do, be there for each other in good times and in bad. And that's why I've travelled here this week, to make clear on behalf of the new Australian government and in particular on behalf of the new Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, that our commitment to you is this: we will work with you to make our Pacific family even stronger. We will listen and we will hear you. Your ideas about how we can face our shared challenges and achieve our shared aspirations together. I was Australia's first ever climate minister, and I know the imperative we all share to take serious action to reduce emissions and transform our economies. Nothing's more central to the security and economies of the Pacific. I understand that climate change isn't an abstract threat. It's a present and existential one. In the Pacific Island Forum's Boy Declaration on Regional Security from 2018, the first key article that I actually referenced a number of times in our election campaign is this: we reaffirm that climate change remains the single greatest threat to the livelihoods, security and well-being of the peoples of the Pacific. You've been saying this for a long time. Pacific leaders were saying this to me when I was Climate Minister over a decade ago. And you've been crystal clear and you've been consistent. You've led the global debate. I acknowledge that and I understand that under past governments, Australia has neglected its responsibility to act on climate, ignoring the calls of our Pacific family to act, disrespecting Pacific nations in their struggle to adapt to what is an existential threat. But whether it manifests in rising sea levels or in disastrous bushfires and catastrophic flooding, climate change is happening across the Pacific family. So I assure you, we have heard. As our election last weekend showed, Australians understand the imperative of acting on climate change. The climate crisis loomed as one of the key concerns to the Australian people. And there is a huge groundswell of support for taking real action on the climate crisis in Australia. And the new government is firmly committed to making it happen. We were elected on a platform of reducing emissions by 43% by 2030 and reaching net zero by 2050. And we're not just going to say it, we will enshrine it in law, and we will submit a new nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC very soon. We are committed to transitioning to a low-carbon economy and moving to cleaner and cheaper energy. And the plan that we have will see the proportion of renewable energy in Australia in our national energy market increase to 82% by 2030. So it's a plan that's about boosting renewable energy, creating jobs and reducing emissions, because we will end the climate wars in our country. This is a different Australian government and a different Australia. And we will stand shoulder to shoulder with you, our Pacific family, in response to this crisis. We understand that we need to work together like never before, for our peoples and for generations to come. That's why we've announced an Australia-Pacific Climate Infrastructure Partnership to support climate-related infrastructure and energy projects in Pacific countries and Timor-Leste. It's why we will work to regain Australia's role as an international leader on climate change. We will reinstate the role of Australia's Ambassador for Climate Change, and we have proposed a bid to co-host a future UN Conference of the Parties with Pacific Island countries. And I'm looking forward to further discussions in the region about this idea. My brothers and sisters, our region has not faced a more vexing set of circumstances for decades. The triple challenges of climate, COVID and strategic contests will challenge us in new ways. We understand that the security of any one Pacific family member rests on the security of all. And we have a collective responsibility as we face these challenges to secure our region's interests today and in the future. And as Australia's Foreign Minister, I commit to working with you and to listening to you, this generation of Pacific leaders, to navigate these challenges together. We will remain a critical development partner for the Pacific family in the years ahead. And Australia will be a partner that doesn't come with strings attached, nor imposing unsustainable financial burdens. We're a partner that won't erode Pacific priorities or Pacific institutions. We believe in transparency. We believe in true partnerships. We will respect Pacific priorities and your institutions. We will support growth and development that is sustainable. We will contribute to the long-term stability and security of the Pacific. We will expand opportunities for Pacific workers in Australia whilst also improving their working conditions. We will deepen our defence cooperation and our maritime cooperation, and we will offer quality climate resilient infrastructure, and we will increase Australia's overseas development assistance to the Pacific by $525 million over the next 4 years as we work with you in the recovery from the pandemic. I also know that Pacific women have a key role to play in that recovery and in your economic development. Societies work better and economies work better, communities work better when we remove barriers to the participation of women and girls, when all have an equal place in national life. As the countries of the Pacific continue to chart a course to the recovery from the challenges of COVID, we know that women and girls, their status, their participation, their education, their safety will be a vital part of that recovery. We will always seek to work in partnership with our Pacific family. Part of that partnership will be reflecting Australia's full identity to our family. I believe there is vast untapped power in the reality of modern Australia. You see, the world is multicultural, and so are we. There are at least 270 ancestries represented in Australia. Nearly half of us were born overseas, including me, or have at least one parent born overseas. This gives us capacity to reach into every corner of the world and say we share common ground. And as Foreign Minister, I will tell Australia's full story, our modern diversity, and of course the rich heritage of our First Nations peoples. Australia is proudly home to the oldest living culture on the planet. And I thank Secretary General for his kind words about the Uluru Statement from the Heart, a statement delivered in 2017, a generous offer to all Australians from First Nations peoples to take this next step in our journey towards unity and reconciliation. The Albanese government is committed to implementing the Uluru Statement in full. Voice, treaty, truth. And we will move to enshrine an Indigenous voice to Parliament in this term of government. And this builds on the legacy of the former Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, who in 2008 ensured that his Labor government, of which I was a part, finally delivered the national apology to the stolen generations. And we will develop in my portfolio a First Nations approach to foreign policy. We will appoint Australia's inaugural First Nations ambassador, who will lead a new office in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. And on a range of other fronts, we will be working to enhance the role and position of First Nations peoples both at home and abroad. We will do more to share our voice and reflect Australia's modern identity in the region by boosting Australian broadcasting and media content, and we will increase support for media training and capacity building across the Pacific. For generations, Pacific Islanders have been adding to and shaping Australian culture, and we welcome the contribution people of Pacific heritage bring to Australia. We want to look at ways we can continue to build upon those links. Australia will do more, and we will do it differently. We will ensure that those Pacific Islanders who come to work in Australia are treated fairly, with better conditions. We will allow workers to bring their families. And we will create the Pacific Engagement Visa to provide a pathway to permanency for 3,000 members of our Pacific family per year. But ultimately, our relationship with our Pacific family is not a suite of initiatives. It can't be counted only in dollars or MOUs. It's so much more. Because nothing will change our geography, our proximity. Nothing will change the fact that our future is intertwined. So can I say to my generous hosts here in Fiji, Vinaka, thank you. Thank you for your climate leadership on behalf of the next generation. And I say to you, this government will continue to work with you to strengthen our Vivale partnership. I'm delighted that so many Australians are finally able to return here, a place they regard as their home away from home. And to the Pacific Islands Forum team, Vinaka, thank you for having me here today. The forum is where the Pacific family, in all of its strength and diversity, gather to speak with a unified voice to the world. Because a united Pacific is a stronger Pacific. I look forward to the forum meetings in coming weeks, and I know Prime Minister Albanese is looking forward to listening and contributing positively to the leaders' meeting. So today, or this evening, I was keen to use the opportunity to start to underscore our commitment to doing our part to strengthening our Pacific family. And I was keen to emphasise that we understand that central to this is action on climate change. But we will draw on all elements of our relationships to achieve our shared interest in a stable and prosperous region where rules and sovereignty are respected. You see, as fellow members of the Pacific family, our security and prosperity are truly things we achieve together or not at all. And like any family, when we listen, when we understand each other's concerns, when we act in partnership together, we will succeed. Thank you very much. Shall I do that?